It's very unclear what exactly has happened in New South Wales, but it's obviously not in accordance with the national plan.
Tonight, breaking news, more eased restrictions set to take effect across New South Wales as the state scraps quarantine for fully vaccinated Australians arriving from overseas, with daily COVID cases continuing to trend down. It's Sunday the 17th of October. You're watching 6 News also tonight.
The number of people who are getting it who are unvaccinated will contribute and will be directly linked to the number of people who finish up in hospital.
Freedom Day for Victorians draws closer even as the state beats national coronavirus records amid confusion with some over border and travel rules. But the state's health minister says journalists need to take a chill pill. And tributes continue to flow in after a UK Conservative MP was stabbed to death while meeting with constituents at a church in what authorities say was a terrorist attack. We'll look at the risk politicians face globally after the second killing of a British lawmaker in 5 years. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Later this hour, Prime Minister Scott Morrison confirms he will attend COP26 climate talks in Glasgow amid tensions within the coalition over net zero emissions policy by 2050. First night, for almost 2 years, no one has been allowed in, or for that matter, out. Australia's international border has been closed since March 2020, leaving thousands of citizens stranded overseas. We quickly became known by some as a hermit kingdom, but one of our first freedoms to go could return earlier than you think. From November 1, New South Wales will scrap quarantine arrangements for Australians arriving from overseas, provided they're fully vaccinated and test negative for COVID-19 before and after their flight. So is it now an international travel free-for-all, and what does this mean for the rest of the nation as we approach Christmas? Chief Reporter Connor 4K explains.
If you were to believe the headlines or the hype, in just under a fortnight Australia will reopen to the world. Outbound travel will have no strings attached and international tourists will return to Australia. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
People, returning Australians, tourists who want to come back, who want to visit Australia, who want to come into Sydney, hotel quarantine will be a thing of the past. We are opening Sydney and New South Wales to the world.
As you saw there, newly minted New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet implied that travel to New South Wales would be available to all fully vaccinated international travellers. But what happens come November 1 is far more nuanced.
That this is about Australian residents and citizens first.
Hours later, Prime Minister Scott Morrison was forced to clarify, if overrule, several critical details.
Good afternoon. The Commonwealth Government has made no decision to allow other visa holders, skilled visa holders, student visa holders, international visitors travelling under an ETA or other international visa arrangement, visiting visa arrangement, to come into Australia under these arrangements. They are decisions for the Commonwealth Government, as the Premier and I know.
Far from being a free-for-all, the Prime Minister says flights will be restricted to Australian citizens, residents and their immediate family.
We also agreed that we would be looking at expanding the definition of immediate family to include the parents of Australian residents and citizens. Now, in New South Wales' case, that means that those family members will be able to come into Sydney if they are vaccinated and not have to quarantine under the arrangements that the Premier has announced today.
Crucially, they must be double vaccinated and test negative before boarding.
So this is further demonstration of Australians getting vaccinated is enabling them to do more and more and more.
Fortress Australia will fall in stages, though the timeline is unclear. Migrants are next, as well as those with work or study visas. Then the so-called challenge of tourists. The announcement was littered with vagaries and contradictions from both government and media. Queensland's government was reportedly blindsided by the curveball announcement.
There's just been an enormous change this morning that I haven't been able to get my head around.
WA Premier Mark McGowan says the announcement of quarantine-free international travel for all Australians could delay his state's border reopening.
Who's furious?
Locals, people are furious that they can go to London, but they can't come to WA.
Look, it's very unclear what exactly has happened in New South Wales, but it's obviously not in accordance with the national plan. what is going on over there. It's probably just as safe overseas as it is in New South Wales. But Western Australia is in a very different position. We don't have any COVID. We don't have any lockdowns. We don't have any restrictions. But if we get cases, obviously, then we'll have to put in place restrictions and rules and potentially lockdowns, and people get sick and some people will die.
Both Queensland and WA are yet to set a date to reopen their interstate borders.
So we basically don't let anyone in from New South Wales at this point in time because it is an extreme risk jurisdiction.
So how will quarantine-free travel differ in states with lower vaccination rates than New South Wales? Scott Morrison says for these states, arrivals will be capped. A controversial coronavirus countermeasure, Australia's closed borders have curtailed infections and splintered families. Imposed in March of 2020, the Commonwealth didn't hesitate shutting the country's international border during the early days of the pandemic. Late last year, 6 News spoke to Californian woman Kelly Burns. In a long-distance relationship with her New South Wales partner, Australia's tough border rules meant they hadn't seen each other in more than a year. The international border upending her plan to move here long-term.
There's no update, there's no timeline, there's nothing that we're given that, okay, we're going to bring temporary visa holders back into Australia on this date, or here's your game plan. It's like we just don't even exist, which is really frustrating.
This will come as welcome news. While it's not quite unrestricted travel, it's certainly a light at the end of the tunnel for the tourism industry and the thousands stranded or separated.
Canberrans have been urged to continue following the rules after the ACT's lockdown officially ended. The Territory's gradual reopening is now in effect, but there are still restrictions in place, including masks mandatory both indoors and outdoors, unless you're eating or drinking. Licensed venues, cafes and restaurants can now serve seated customers with strict capacity limits in place, but you can now get a haircut, go to the gym or pool, and students are beginning to return to the classroom. And southern Tasmania is now ending a weekend of lockdown. Hobart and surrounding regions were plunged back into restrictions after a COVID hotel quarantine breach, where a 31-year-old man with the Delta strain of the virus spent around 18 hours in the community, had not disclosed his exact whereabouts, and authorities say hadn't been cooperative. Even before the announcement was made by Premier Peter Gutwein on Friday afternoon, panic buying was seen at shops, leading to empty shelves and large queues, as you're seeing now. Until now, Tasmania was the last state or territory in Australia to not have a lockdown since the initial national one in early 2020. Well, freedom for Victorians is drawing closer amid rising vaccination rates, even as the state beats national COVID case records, the first time anywhere in the country since the pandemic began that over 2,000 daily infections have been recorded. It comes amid some confusion over border and travel rules, with Melburnians in regional areas split, while travellers from New South Wales can still come into the state. But the state's Health Minister Martin Foley says journalists need to take a chill pill. Porter Marley Hawke has the latest developments from Melbourne.
This week, Victoria is seeing COVID cases soar to a new record high, on Thursday reaching 2,297
new cases of coronavirus yesterday. All were locally acquired, and we currently have 20,505 active cases. This is a significant jump in numbers, which we know will come as a surprise to many Victorians. We had hoped to see a plateau in numbers, but today's jump does still land within the projected range of the Burnett modelling.
The spike has happened as schools have started to reopen, but we still do not know the true cause of the spike. School students in Year 4 and above are required to wear masks. This is to ensure a safe return to on-site learning. Studies have shown that the use of masks within these age groups can prevent the spread of COVID-19.
Health to ensure that we can keep the number of students impacted and the time as short as possible.
The class will be the most at-risk contacts, obviously, but other classes won't necessarily need to quarantine at home. We certainly won't have the entire school quarantining for a full 14-day period. It is literally a vertical line looking at the vaccination coverage for 12 to 15-year-olds. They're coming in droves to get vaccinated.
Victoria is currently 1 week away from hitting the 70% vaccination target that was set. though restrictions will continue to ease gradually.
We'd reached a peak, and my answer was, 2-3 days, even a week, doesn't necessarily mean that it's, trends have to be backed up, trends have to be, maintained for a period of time. It doesn't mean that we're ever complacent about these things. We want less cases, not more. But the fact of the matter is, we are so close to being 70% double dose vaccinated, then 80%. And that means the Victorian community will have done their job. The number of people who are getting it who are unvaccinated will contribute and will be directly linked to the number of people who finish up in hospital. It may not be linear, it may not be the 10%, it may be less than that, but we'll always have a close eye on that, and there'll still be contact tracing, there'll still be protocols, it'll be different because you're talking about volume, but we'll still be tracking and tracing.
With the Army getting involved to help deal with this spike in hospitalisations. Marley Hawke, 6 News.
New South Wales residents can now use the Service New South Wales app to integrate their digital vaccination status from the Medicare app. The move is set to simplify the check-in process in the state. Here's how you can do it.
Head to Proof of Vaccinations and view history in the Medicare Express Plus app. Find Share with Check-in app and choose Service New South Wales. Log in to the Service New South Wales app, accept the terms, and you're good to go.
It comes after Victoria also did the same. Moving away from the pandemic now, the Prime Minister has confirmed he will attend COP26 climate talks in Glasgow. Scott Morrison will be joining world leaders in person amid calls to increase the ambition of their climate change policies. It comes amid tensions within the coalition over net zero emissions policy by 2050. SBS reports the summit is widely considered to be the most crucial international climate meeting since the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015. Overseas now, tributes are continuing to flow in after a UK Conservative MP was stabbed to death while meeting with constituents at a church. The killing of Sir David Amess has now been declared a terrorist attack by authorities. He is the second sitting British MP to be killed in 5 years and the sixth since World War II. And now there's growing conversation about the risks politicians face globally. Porter Lincoln Holmes has the details.
It was a killing that shocked the UK and the world.
He was one of the kindest, nicest, most gentle people in politics.
Conservative MP Sir David Amess was stabbed to death at a meeting in a church in what authorities say was a terrorist attack. Tributes are right now continuing to flow in from both sides of politics to the veteran MP, who had been serving since 1983.
He was highly respected and much liked across the Houses of Parliament on all sides.
We've lost today a fine public servant and a much-loved friend and colleague.
Sir David has now become the second MP to be killed in 5 years, with the sixth since World War II.
This was a difficult incident, but our officers and paramedics from the East of England Ambulance Service worked extremely hard to save Sir David.
In 2016, Labor's Joe Cox was murdered by a far-right extremist.
At 1:48pm, Joe Cox was pronounced deceased by a doctor who was working with a paramedic crew.
In 1990, Ian Gore was killed by an IRA car bomb outside his home.
His car blew up in the driveway seconds after it was started up.
Sir Anthony Berry was one of the 5 people to be killed in the Grand Hotel bombing in October 1984.
5 were killed in the attack, which was claimed by the outlawed IRA organisation.
Robert Bradford was assassinated in 1981.
Mr Bradford had been holding his fortnightly constituency meeting at a community centre in South Belfast when 3 men dressed as workmen drove up and shot him.
And in 1979, Ari Neve was killed after his car exploded as he drove from an underground car park.
The House of Commons underground car park still sealed as investigations continue into the car bomb attack in which Mr Ari Neve was killed.
Questions are now being raised as to whether politicians both in the UK and across the world need more security to stop potentially deadly attacks, with a review of the MP security now ordered. Here at home, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has said he was shocked and terribly saddened by the news, and Victorian Liberal MP Tim Smith said he was a true gentleman. Sir David leaves behind his wife Julia and their 5 children. He was 69. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
Italy is now requiring all workers to be vaccinated or take frequent coronavirus tests in one of the toughest mandates yet. Under the new rules, those who do not have a so-called green pass with a QR code as proof of either full vaccination, recent recovery from an infection or negative tests within the previous 48 hours must take unpaid leave. CNN reports that employees who go to work without the pass risk suspension without pay, and employers could also face fines. Thousands have protested in the country in opposition, blocking trucks and gathering in the streets. Over 80% of Italy's eligible population has now been fully vaccinated against the virus. Donald Trump has been ordered to testify in a lawsuit by activists who claim his security guards assaulted them during a protest outside Trump Tower 6 years ago. According to Bloomberg, the plaintiffs claimed that the former president's guards attacked them in September 2015 while they were rallying against his views on Mexican immigrants and Black Lives Matter. Trump's videotaped deposition on Monday morning local time will be held in New York's Trump Tower. White House officials have warned that Americans may face higher prices and some empty shelves this Christmas. The ongoing supply crisis, which is driven in part by the pandemic, may lead to higher prices, as you can imagine, and empty shelves this holiday season. And the latest Reuters poll shows that the economy continues to be both an important issue for both Democrats and Republicans as President Joe Biden comes under fire. US correspondent Jackson Gosnell has the latest.
Leo, a shipping nightmare happening right now in the U.S. in the Pacific, and that is because several cargo ships have gathered in the ports, but they're all sitting there. They can't dock because there's not enough workers to unload cargo ships. President Biden is working on this. He says that it is a top priority for the White House, and he says that everyone should be buying their Christmas gifts right now instead of waiting until the last minute, because things are going to be hard to find, and since that is going to be the case, prices are likely to go up. There is already shortages of some items in the U.S. Electronics are becoming more difficult to find, among other things. So they really push that message to buy things right now. Now, the president will meet with private businesses next week to talk about how they can take steps to get things where they need to be and kind of get rid of this bottleneck of a shipping problem that we have in the Pacific Ocean right now. And so we are going to continue to follow this story, but it is important to note that workers are just not there. That's simply the biggest problem. If you need a job, definitely look about getting into the shipping industry, because with so many people still recovering from the pandemic and staying at home, there is just simply not enough workers. Some blame it on unemployment benefits that encourage people to stay home rather than work. Others say that's not the problem. But the economy remains a top priority for both Republicans and Democrats, and certainly getting this shipping issue fixed is at the forefront. We'll continue to follow the very latest from here in the U.S. I'm Jackson Gosnell. Back to you.
A skeleton buried by the AD 79 eruption of Mount Vesuvius has been discovered. Archaeologists say the man, aged in his 40s, was killed just steps away from the sea as he tried to flee the eruption. It happened in the ancient Roman town of Herculaneum, close to Pompeii, and the discovery has been described as sensational by Italy's cultural minister. The Guardian reports that the man's bones were a bright red colour, described as the mark of the stains left by the victims' bloods. And now here's Arvin and Sarah with what's coming up later tonight on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Tonight on WAMN News, think of the children. WA's top doctor calls for the border to stay closed until most of our children below 12 are vaccinated. A WAMN News exclusive.
Not ready. The Australian Indian Medical Association backs AMA-WA calls to keep WA borders closed this year.
And Strive for Climate. Perth students joined nationwide youth rally over climate inaction. Plus Dr. Andrew Miller's comment.
Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
All right, thanks to both Arvin and Sarah there. Now tomorrow's forecast right across the country. Brisbane, thunderstorms at top of 26, 24 in Sydney, 21 degrees in the nation's capital Canberra, 18 in Melbourne, 13 in Hobart, perfect lockdown weather there, though it's nothing out of the ordinary, 23 in Adelaide, 28 in Alice Springs, 23 in sunny in Perth, and in Darwin, a warm top of 34. And finally tonight, this Tuesday, 6 News will be speaking to Rukshan Fernando for our next episode of Uncensored. You probably know him better as Real Rukshan, who's been thrust into the spotlight over his footage and live streams of the recent protests in Melbourne. But there's been division over what to call him. Is he an independent journalist, a wedding photographer, or just a right-wing activist? We'll ask them the tough questions in an unedited interview, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on the 6 News YouTube channel and our website, 6newsau.com. And that is 6 News for this Sunday evening. You can stay up to date with the latest headlines by heading to our website, 6newsau.com, and by following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and lead research 6 News AU to find us. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.